Ricardo says, I was a child during the women's movement and the sexual revolution. The white man countered the civil rights movement, the sexual revolution. Blank many black children. Nobody wants to all right, hey, but that's what we talking about today. And that's what we talking about today. That's why we getting into it. So let's do it.
My name is Lila Rose, and I'm the president of Live Action. And I'm so excited to have with us Sue Ellen Browder, a writer and investigative journalist who worked for Cosmopolitan magazine for over 20 years, starting in 1970 and leading up into the 90s. Sue has recently come out with an amazing must-read book called Subverted: How I Helped the Sexual Revolution Hijack the Women's Movement. She's here with us to share more about her amazing book and her story. Thanks for being with us, Sue.
It's a great joy to be here. Thank you, Lila.
So tell us first how you got started in journalism leading up to the time when you started to work for Cosmo.
I grew up in Iowa and I wanted to be a journalist. I went to the University of Missouri School of Journalism, got a great degree, went to California, took a year and worked in a newspaper. And actually at that time, this was in the 1960s, I was actually fired for being pregnant at this newspaper.
So who fired you?
The editors. That was policy. Yeah, it was at the South Bay Daily Breeze.
And what year was that?
That was in 1969.
Wow.
And I didn't know, I had no idea that you'd be fired for being pregnant, but they said you could only work 5 months and after that you'd have to quit with no promise of having a job when you'd come back. So I pretended that I was only 5 months pregnant when I was actually 8 months pregnant.
Well done.
And I'm very short and I was waddling around like an elephant and people were saying, oh my goodness, really? 5 months?
But the editor outright came and said, you're fired for being pregnant.
Yeah, well, yes.
And I want to address that because it seems it could be indicative of real problems women were facing then and still many are facing today. What was the culture like in the 50s and the 60s for women?
Well, people don't remember how bad it was for women. When women were going into the workforce, they were finding a lot of injustices that they didn't expect. That was only one of them. The women were not paid what men were paid for doing the same jobs. Women were fired for being pregnant. A woman who was a flight attendant, if she got pregnant, or if she even got married or gained weight or turned 32, she was fired. So there were a lot of things. There was a lot of sexual harassment going on. That's still happening today.
Unfortunately, yes.
That's right. So there were a lot of things. Women in some states could not serve on a jury. A married woman could not get credit in her own name. So this was an entirely different. Women couldn't go to college in some places. It was very hard for a woman. Very few women were doctors and lawyers. Women were shut out of the professions. So this was a time that women were very concerned about a lot of injustices, and they were all pulling together to try to correct those. And when Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique in 1963, that was the relaunch of the women's movement in the 20th century. She was saying that women were at home, they were bored, they were housewives, they were educated, they wanted to get out and work in the workforce, they wanted their own lives, they also wanted to be mothers, but they wanted the whole thing. They wanted a lot more than that.
Now, I mean, let's run back and what she just said about what Betty Friedan said that women were. They were bored, they were home. That's black women wasn't home bored. Majority of black women were not home bored. So now some of the issues that she was talking about earlier, black women were affected by some of those issues in a greater capacity because black women wasn't even, especially black, they didn't have access to a lot of those industries and jobs and things. So we even looking at it on the level of the industries that black women were in and the discrimination that they faced, not at the hands of black men though. Remember that black women didn't face those that type of discrimination and things at the hands of black men. And if they did, it was a very, very, very small percentage because how many black men had control over industries and jobs and things at that time? How many black men have control over jobs and industries now? So think about the number of black men who did not have control over jobs and industries at that time. But let's listen to what she said women were, especially, and remember, she's talking about white women. She's not talking about the conditions that black women were in, because the majority of black women weren't home board, not in those days.
Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique in 1963. That was the relaunch of the women's movement in the 20th century. She was saying that women were at home, they were bored, they were housewives, they were educated, they wanted to get out and work in the workforce, they wanted their own lives, they also wanted to be mothers, but they wanted the whole thing. They wanted a lot more than they had. And so at that time, Betty wrote her Feminine Mystique book, and everybody went crazy. They said,
now does that sound like the conditions that black women were living in? I'm just saying, does that sound in the early days of the 1900s? In the early days of the 1900s, let's say from 1900 through 1950, does that sound like the life that black women in America was living? So come on now. So remember, let's talk about this whole idea of this sexual revolution, right? So the sexual revolution refers to a broad set of social and cultural changes in Western societies, especially the United States, roughly between the 1950s and the early 1970s. So let's looking at the 1950s. So let's look at let's just say 1950s and 60s. 1950s and 60s, and we can even throw in the 70s, were the majority, or even 50%, or even 20% of black women living in the lap of luxury in America of what she just described. They just home bored and they want to do something different. No. But remember, white women needed black women to be a part of this to help strengthen their movement. But white women also knew that they had the buffers and they would eventually go back. And that's what they did. They went back to their men, but it affected us differently. So, like I said, the sexual revolution refers to a broad set of social and cultural changes in Western societies, especially the United States, roughly between the late 1950s and the early 1970s, that alter how people think about sex, sexuality, and intimate life. It's associated with wider acceptance in premarital sex, increased access to contraception, growing visibility of homosexuality, more permissive attitudes toward pornography, greater public discussions of sex outside of traditional marital context. British and American historians often date its heyday in the 1960s to the early 1970s, though some scholars suggest shifts began after World War II and extended well beyond those decades. So they say major contributing factors to the sexual revolution was the birth control pill, academic sex research by people like Alfred Kinsey and later Masters and John, which challenged traditional assumptions about human sexual behavior, countercultural movements, including anti-war activism, feminism, gay liberation, and the broader questioning of authority and tradition. Also, the sexual revolution as a phrase was also used earlier. For example, in the 1930s by psychoanalyst William Wright to discuss sexual liberation as part of broader cultural transformation, but the mid-20th century meaning is the most common in U.S. history. Scholars debate whether it was a true revolution or more of an evolutionary shift in norms, but there's a wide agreement it played a role in changing attitudes about sexuality in Western societies. All right, so sexual revolution. So we got a little background on that. So let's continue.
Yes, we agree with this. They all agreed with the women's movement. It was very unifying in those days. And
what impact did Betty Friedan's Feminine Mystique have on you as a young woman in the workforce in the 60s?
Well, I think the impact that it had was I felt like I could do anything. I really, by the time, that was 63 that she wrote that book. By the time I got out of college, it was 68. And 69, I thought I could set the world on fire. And then when I found out that I was going to get fired for being pregnant, I was like, what? What? Well, this women's movement was obviously for me.
And what interested you about Cosmo? Why did you go for the job?
Well, I was glamour struck. I was a small town girl from Iowa, and I was very glamour struck. But also, when I was at the University of Missouri, we had a class where we studied magazines and what were they doing in those magazines. How, if you were going to write for this magazine, what would you do? Magazine markets, it was called. So I chose Cosmopolitan. I was fascinated with these magazines. So then when I got to New York City, the reason I got the job at Cosmo, it was just advertised in the New York Times. I didn't know it was Cosmo. It was just a magazine that you were looking for an editorial assistant. And so I applied, it was Cosmo. And I was like, wow. And there were 18 people that applied for the job, and I got it.
Now, Helen Gurley Brown, the editor of Cosmo, you had some interesting conversations with her, and you learned some interesting things you share in your book about how Cosmo got across a certain philosophy or message to women at the time. Can you share more about that?
Right. She taught that sex without the kids and hard work will set you free. That was Helen Gurley Brown's philosophy. She had been a copywriter.
Sex without the kids and hard work will set you free. That was her message. Sex without the kids and hard work will set you free. Will set you free from what? Set you free from what? Because we can see now it didn't work. Even because basically this is what this is about. These ideas didn't work, but that's what it was at that time. But remember, they were initially, this came out of a group of privileged white women who ain't had nothing to do, or white women who had these ideas that they were, or they felt, or whatever, they were oppressed by their men. But trickling down to the Black community, sex without the kids and hard work will set you free. That didn't set our community free. It set us back. We got set back. They said, Victor Blackman says, they set the world on fire. All right, feminism is on the verge of collapsing the entire system. Said white women want liberation from white men. For what reason is beyond Black folks, but Black women didn't need liberation from Black men. It was Black men who needed it. Our hands were tied for 5 centuries. Yep. You already know it. Ricardo, you already know it. Victor says, without children and families, there's no, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm always preaching. We need families. We need families. Black men and Black women, we got to find a way to get along. We got to find a way to reprogram ourselves and get along. But we got to understand what happened to us and who were the players and people who helped create this mess that we living in for ourselves. God is Yemen, y'all. I appreciate you being here. How you doing? How you doing? Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Helen Gurley Brown. Remember this name. This name is one of the names that is lost in history when we're talking about the major players in helping to push these destructive ideologies. White women always competed with white men for superior, right? Look, so check this out. I'm glad you said that, Renee. You reminded me. So check this out. So I worked in sexual and domestic violence prevention for about 12 years. And I can remember sitting in some of the sessions and hearing some of the white women talk and taking into account the unfortunate relationships that some of those women were in. But listening to some of the other women talk, a light went off. I was like, white women don't want equality. White women want power. Equality is the cloak that they use, but they really want power. They were going for power. And in a sneaky way, they slid that message to Black women. Hey, go for power. Go for power. Go to try to overpower your men. But remember, our community didn't have the structure it needed to combat that, and we fell victim to it. And we like the fly in the Venus flytrap, and the flytrap has closed, and we're the fly that has been trying for decades to try to get out that Venus flytrap, and we just can't. So I appreciate you, Victor. I appreciate you, Yemi. I got us, Renee. Everybody in here, I appreciate you all. Yep. That is why they do that to each other. But remember this name. Helen Gurley Brown, because put her right up there with the rest of them.
In California, she was one of the biggest advertising copywriters in the country. She was very good at what she did. And then she took Cosmopolitan, which had been a homemaker's magazine, and turned it into a sex rag, basically.
Sex rag.
And it was very, very popular in those days. Cosmo was the hottest women's magazine in the nation. And that was her philosophy. Hard work and sex without the kids will set you free. She didn't have children. She was married, but she didn't have children, nor did she want them. She said children were more of a nuisance than a blessing. And you could have
children were more of a nuisance than a blessing. This is what she's pushing. And remember, like we need to grow our population. Who leads the country in baby deletions? How many baby deletions have our community had since they became possible? I think they said up to 20 to 40 million have happened. Imagine if our population had grown by 40 million over the past 70 years. We would have, well, if we were codified and structured, we would have a lot more power. Because you can't just have a whole bunch of Negroes just out here running around with no code and no structure. But they convinced us to take each other out in other ways, using YouTube language, but you get it. You get what I'm saying. They convinced us to participate and being the leading ones of taking us out. Because remember, I call it the Negro programming, right? The white man's greatest invention was the nigga, right? Nigga mindset, Negro programming to be YouTube friendly, right? So with that implanted in the programming and all the social engineering, that's why I asked the question. That's why the title is The Sexual Revolution, Liberation of Social Engineering. How did it affect us? What were we socially engineered into? A. McNeil says they're all in the file. Celebrities, elites, politicians, eyes wide shut, elites, ritualistic, cabal, they're all involved. Yep. Hey man, look, even look, on the city level here in Tallahassee, I've paid attention enough. If you wanna get ahead, you're gonna have to give up your booty. And I don't want to get ahead that much. So yeah, I can't do it. I can't do none of the eyes wide shut stuff. Nah. No. But you're right though, hey man, you're right. But it's like that's all of that comes out of this sexual revolution, this I would call it sexual degeneracy. Because we can see how in that realm we've degenerated. Black people have. Our focus is not family. Our focus is fornication over family, which is crazy. That's not what civilized people do.
You can get married, but you should have abortions or you should use the pill. If the pill failed, you should have an abortion.
Can you tell me more how she instructed you and other writers to sell her particular ideology?
We made up a lot of those stories. It was just, for example, a young woman, her name is Mia. She goes to Paris. She meets a man on the Champs-Elysees. That night, they fall in love. They fall in love that day. They go to a hotel on the left bank. And the next morning, she knows that she's in love. It's all beautiful. It was all made up. There was no Mia. There was no hotel on the left bank. It was all an illusion. And we created this fantasy world, the Cosmo girl, at least in the beginning, before a lot of women began to buy into it. The Cosmo girl was just a sexual fantasy. She was a marketer's dream, however, because she would work hard, and she was on the pill, and she would get an abortion, so they weren't gonna have to fire her for being pregnant because she was never gonna get pregnant. Okay, she didn't press for working women's rights. She didn't press for family rights. She didn't press for child care. She just worked hard and for the corporation. Basically, she was a man.
So
let me run it. Let me let her say that again.
It was just You know, for example, a young woman, her name is Mia. She goes to Paris. She meets a man on the Champs-Elysees. That night, they fall in love. They fall in love that day. They go to hotel on the left bank, and the next morning, you know, she knows that she's in love. It's all beautiful. It's all made up. There was no Mia. There was no hotel on the left bank. It was all an illusion. And we created this fantasy world. The Cosmo girl, at least in the beginning, before a lot of women began to buy into it, the Cosmo girl was just a sexual fantasy. She was a marketer's dream, however, because she would work hard, and she was on the pill, and she would get an abortion, so they weren't gonna have to fire her for being pregnant, because she was never gonna get pregnant. Okay, she didn't press for working women's rights. She didn't press for family rights. She didn't press for child care. She just worked hard and for the corporation. Basically, she was a man.
So
turning the women's in. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? I got to be the man. Dutch, I'm not familiar with that sorority. Eta Upsilon Gamma has a badge with skull and bones and a Masonic. Yeah, I mean, look, all them folks. Look, all of these people. Once again, where my names at? Where my names at? All of these people. That's what I'm saying. Like the overall outcomes, because these are people who help shape society. So the Black community may not have been their focus, their target, but they understood their impact, and they understood what overall long-term outcomes were, because these were people who studied this stuff. They just didn't haphazardly do this. Once again, Margaret Sanger, Betty Friedan, Helen Gurley Brown, Larry Ladler, and Bernard Nathanson. She gonna get into all of them. We getting into all of them. I got information and little tidbits on all of those people. So yeah, like, I'm glad she's spilling the beans. Because we can get into the people who help architect and construct the debauchery that we live in to this day. Social engineering is real. That's why they call it systematic. That's why Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Neely Fuller, all our scholars say it's a system. It's not on the individual level, it's on the systematic level. So it can systematically destabilize us. Yes, individuals can rise up within the system, but the masses won't. It's not designed for the masses. So check this out. Who started the sexual revolution? Intentional figures and forces. It's important to distinguish roots from drivers. And remember, Sue Ellen Browder just told us that Helen Gurley Brown, one of her real missions was to make sure that they turn women into men. You're going to be the marketer's dream. You're going to work hard. You're going to play hard. You're going to hunch hard, and you're going to spend a lot of money. You might have a family. Forget them kids. Work hard, spend hard, punch hard, and be the realest man you can be as a woman. Said real women's empowerment is equal opportunities, equality in society, balance, natural sexuality, and paid family leave. We get rid of this white supremacy stuff. We can get somewhere, because we have always been more egalitarian. Black folk, we have always been more egalitarian. Now, Black folk under the system of white supremacy, Black folk under colonial ideologies, the colonial rule, we got some Black folk that's treating Black women messed up. We can all admit that. We ain't gonna act like there wasn't no sucker ass Black men out there. They are. It's a lot of sucker ass Black men out there. But what we also understand is the social engineering is real. We have been specifically programmed to go against each other. So that's why we're here, to fight the power, fight the programming, and make sure that we can get along and build, because we have to elevate from survival units. We're still operating in survival units. We have to elevate from survival units to get back to creating families, for ourselves. So you got people, scientific and intellectual influences within the sexual revolution. People like Alfred Kinsey, his research on sexual behavior in men and women showed that many America's sexual behaviors didn't match public norms, helping legitimize sexual research. Masters and Johnsons did their clinical studies on sexual physiology, published in the 1960s, pushed sexuality into scientific and public conversation. Psychoanalytic thinkers and counterculture writers, Wilhelm Reich and others influenced young activists and intellectuals. Cultural and technical drivers were the pill, approved for contraceptive use in 1960, feminist movements, second wave feminism emphasized women's autonomy over their bodies and sexual lives, gay liberation and civil rights activism expanded definitions of sexual identity, and we can see how civil rights was hijacked. Civil rights in this, because a part of this was the hijacking of civil rights as well. So yeah.